Tally-ho, old sport. We're back at it again with another assortment of those fighter-ace sorts of chaps for your entertainment. Okay, I'm not gonna do that all video, but we have done Germany. We have done Soviet Union. Now it's time to take a trip to Albion to visit the King's Own heroes of the skies. This time, the British are coming. I'm Indy Neidell, and this is a World War II in real-time gallery special covering British flying aces. Like our previous galleries, these are not in any order or selected with any specific focus in mind, yada yada yada. Quick note before I start, this video is specifically for pilots explicitly from Britain, not RAF pilots in general. Commonwealth pilots or volunteers from other allied nations will be covered in other videos. So let us dive in with our first tale of the day. A lesser-known ace with a brilliant but tragically short-lived career. Archibald Archie McKellar was born 1912 in Paisley, Scotland. Scotland, okay? Like many young men of his generation, McKellar came of age in the shadow of the Great War, and he spent a lot of time in his adolescent years reading about fighter aces from that conflict. He was educated in Glasgow and then joined his father's construction business before getting into aviation. He was not flamboyant and not aristocratic and not particularly theatrical. He was, by most accounts, blunt, direct, and intensely competitive. McKellar joined the Royal Air Force in 1936, following stints at a civilian flying club and in the Auxiliary Air Force. After flight training, he was posted to No. 602 Squadron in Glasgow, which operated the Hawker Hind interwar bomber. By the time the war broke out in September 1939, he was already fully trained and ready for the air war, his squadron now outfitted with Supermarine Spitfires. McKellar's first real action came October 16, 1939, where the Luftwaffe staged a daring assault on British ships in the Firth of Forth. McKellar and another pilot intercepted a Junkers 88 and shot it down, the first Luftwaffe plane shot down in British waters in the war. That victory is credited by many to McKellar. Later that same month, a Heinkel HE-111 became the first German plane of the war to be shot down on British soil. That victory is largely credited to McKellar too. There's a bit of ambiguity since multiple British fighters were involved in that fight, but broad consensus is that he would have claims to shared victories at the very least. As the war rolled into 1940, he transferred over to No. 605 Squadron, a Hurricane squadron, just as Luftwaffe raids over England really started to intensify. And as those raids ramped up, so did McKellar's kill count. 3 on August 15th, 4 September 9th, another 3 September 15th, and 5 on October 7th. By November 1st, 1940, McKellar had amassed 21 total victory claims, though a couple of those are shared or probable claims, placing him among the highest scoring RAF pilots of the Battle of Britain. This is, sadly, where his story comes to an abrupt end. That afternoon, McKellar was shot down by a Bf-109 over Kent and was either killed in the cockpit or unable to bail out before his plane crashed. He did possibly gain one more final victory this day, a Bf-109 near Canterbury, well within the area McKellar was operating in. No other pilot claimed that kill, and it remains officially uncredited. For his contributions, McKellar was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross and Bar before his death, and was posthumously awarded the Distinguished Service Order, capping off a career which burned very brightly, but very briefly. Next up, we've got a man so determined to fly that he didn't let little details like the number of arms he had get in the way. James MacLachlan was born in 1919 in Cheshire. He was part of the younger wartime generation, intelligent, ambitious, and drawn quickly into a rapidly expanding Air Force. MacLachlan joined the RAF in 1937 on a short service commission at the tender age of 17. His training went well, and he was identified as a prospect with some natural talent for aerial combat. He expressed a fascination with gunnery training and a pronounced dislike for working in bomber aircraft. By the time the war broke out in 1939, he had been flying the Fairey Battle for 2 years. That plane, though, was generally so poor and outdated that even pilots like MacLachlan could not perform well in it. He actually had a relatively quiet period through 1939 and 1940, his fighter wing and its ferry battles being grounded for much of the campaign in France, and then an inactive spell guarding Scotland from Luftwaffe bombers based in Norway. He later fought in southern England against the main Luftwaffe effort, by now having transitioned over to the Hurricane, but his unit didn't really get involved until late September, when the Germans had changed tack and now favored massed night raids over the big cities. He only participated in a couple of combat scenarios here, and only managed one probable claim, severely damaging a Bf-109 in early October. Then, in February 1941, his career and his life changed abruptly. By this time, MacLachlan was serving in Malta, and had picked up a few victories here and there, enough to formally earn his status as a fighter ace. However, he was getting increasingly frustrated, even careless, at the inadequate performance of the Hurricane against the latest models of the Messerschmitt. In a dogfight on February 16th, he became so focused on pursuing a German fighter, he became completely oblivious to another one lining up behind him for a shot. When that shot came, it was brutal, tearing through the cockpit and filling his left arm with shrapnel and knocking out his engine. He immediately bailed, only able to use his right hand, and was just about conscious when he touched back down on Malta. Fully expecting to die there, he lay supine and prepared for the end, only for sheer irritation to spur him on to survival. In his own words, "Scarcely had I gotten myself fairly comfortable and closed my eyes when I heard the sound of people running. I hurriedly tried to think up some famous last words to give my public, but never had a chance to utter them. I was surrounded by a crowd of shouting, gesticulating Maltese who pulled at my parachute, lifted my head, and drove me so furious that I had to give up the dying idea in order to concentrate completely on kicking every Maltese who came within range." He was relocated to hospital, where his arm was deemed foobar and amputated at the elbow. Now, normally that would be the end of a pilot's career, but he refused to accept that. Returning home, he worked with doctors to design a prosthetic limb that could operate some of the simpler controls on the left side of the Hurricane. He found that keeping his right hand on the control stick, with maps and charts placed on his lap, and his new prosthetic operating the throttle and gear controls, he could just about manage. Not ideal by any means, and it definitely took some getting used to, but it was good enough to get him back into the skies. From there, he continued his career, racking up more kills, this time as leader of No. 1 Squadron, which specialized in night fighter attacks with intruder tactics. Essentially, that means just flying into enemy airspace undetected and hitting planes in transit when they're not expecting it, like taking off, landing, or cruising, for example. With the USA's entry into the war, he also participated in demonstrations for the benefit of American pilots, going on a tour of air bases in the States, as well as flying some German models as part of No. 1426 Flight, the testing and demonstrations unit, specializing in flying Luftwaffe planes. We actually covered that unit extensively as part of the Spies and Ties series, so if you're interested, go check it out. There will be a link in the description. Well, in spring 1943, he returned to the front lines, now flying a P-51 Mustang, and this is unfortunately where his story comes to an end. MacLachlan was pioneering new tactics in the P-51, trying to penetrate German air defenses in occupied France by flying at a very low altitude, allowing pilots to sneak through the massive AA guns and early warning systems and cause chaos deeper inland. On July 18th, 1943, while coming inland near Dieppe, MacLachlan's plane was hit by what was probably small arms fire from the ground, of which a lucky shot either disabled his plane or penetrated the cockpit and wounded him. He crash-landed unceremoniously, kicking up a cloud of dust and debris, leaving him with injuries that turned out to be fatal. Taken prisoner, he endured for nearly 2 more weeks before finally dying from his wounds on July 31st. Well, we all love movies of captured Allied airmen attempting a daring escape from confinement, don't we? Fortunately, we got one of those stories right now. Robert Stanford Tuck was born July 1st, 1906 in Catford, London. He left school as soon as he was old enough to and signed up with the Merchant Navy in 1932, followed by a brief stint in civilian work before joining the RAF. He trained as a fighter pilot and was posted to number 65 Squadron, flying Gloucester Gauntlets and Gladiators before converting to Spitfires. By the time the war broke out in 1939, he was already an experienced regular officer in fighter command. Number 65 Squadron flew interception missions late in 1939, but Tuck didn't see any action until 1940, after he was reassigned to command a unit within number 92 Squadron, another Spitfire unit. That squadron saw extensive combat over Dunkirk and southern England during the battles of France and Britain. And Tuck quickly became established as an aggressive and tactically clever pilot, racking up 10 or so victories, if we're including probable claims, in his first few months of combat. One such victory might have been against a certain Hans-Joachim Marseille, who we recently covered in our German Aces Gallery. By that time, Tuck had already risen through the ranks to be made commander of number 257 Squadron and proved incredibly effective as a leader as well as a pilot, being awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross with 2 bars and the Distinguished Service Order. As the Luftwaffe's assault on England died down and the Brits got some breathing room, Tuck went on a tour of the USA, much like MacLachlan, to train American pilots and get some experience on American planes. Back on the front lines in January 1942, Tuck was shot down over occupied France and taken prisoner, confined to Stalag Luft 3, Stalag Luft 3, the Luftwaffe POW camp for captured Western airmen. There, he shared a room with a certain Roger Bushell, who would later go on to mastermind the famous Great Escape in 1944. Tuck was actually involved in some of the early planning, but was ultimately transferred elsewhere in the facility before the plans came to fruition. That did not stop him from trying to escape, though. Oh no. He made multiple attempts and he eventually succeeded in early 1945. He fled eastward towards the Soviets rather than westwards towards home, which was probably wise since the SS, who were themselves all scrambling westwards, were feeling especially unmerciful by this point in the war. Tuck joined up with some Soviet troops who promptly handed him a rifle and took him into their unit, and he was repatriated later that year. All told, Tuck ended the war with a final record of 27 individual victory claims, maybe up to 35 if we're counting probable and uncertain claims, along with a handful of shared victories to go with them. He retired from the RAF in 1949 and returned to civilian life, though he was never shy about participating in memorial events or offering his expertise to documentaries and movies that covered air combat in World War II. He was also later godfather to a certain Adolf Galland, who had previously made a specific point of coming to meet Tuck after his capture, beginning perhaps an unlikely friendship. It doesn't seem that unlikely. I mean, different sides, but big aces. Well, anyhow, it began a friendship. And Tuck eventually left this earth May 5th, 1987, at the age of 70. Now, my buddy Tom doesn't go out in the daytime for some reason, and also seems a bit stressed around garlic. So he found researching this next one quite fun. John Bob Braham was born in 1920 in Somerset. Braham was still young when war broke out, just 19, but he already had a couple years of experience under his belt, having joined the RAF in 1937. After completing training, he was posted to number 29 Squadron, where he flew the Bristol Blenheim before later transitioning to the Bristol Beaufighter, as his squadron reorganized itself as an experimental night fighter unit. He gets his first victory August 24th, 1940, downing a Dornier 17 while still in his Blenheim, but that was pretty much the height of his accomplishments in 1940. More because of the Blenheim's insufficiencies than anything else. In September, his unit began converting to the Beaufighter, and Braham's success became far more rapid. By the end of 1941, he was among the RAF's leading night aces, credited with 4 victories by July 1941 and 6 by the end of the year. The awards came thick and fast, too, owing to the difficult and unenviable job of fighting at night. He would later become the first RAF pilot to be awarded the Distinguished Service Order with 2 bars, the Distinguished Flying Cross with 2 bars, and basically each bar just means the medal was awarded an additional time. As the war progressed, Braham took command of number 141 Squadron, which began flying intruder missions on the continent, the same kind that MacLachlan flew that I discussed earlier. Here, his kill accelerated rapidly, including some big-name scalps, with German night fighter aces Heinz Finke, Georg Kraft, Hans-Dieter Frank, and August Geiger, all reportedly being taken down by Braham. After that, Braham transitioned to daytime missions in the de Havilland Mosquito in early 1944. But there were maybe a few cracks in his mental health starting to show by then. His tactics were becoming increasingly aggressive, bordering on reckless, as he put himself and his plane at greater and greater risk in pursuit of more victories. He badly needed a break, and he was about to get one whether or not he liked it. On June 25, 1944, Braham was shot down over Denmark and taken prisoner, becoming a fellow inmate of Tuck's at Stalag Luft 3, and he remained in captivity until the end of the war, with a final victory count of 29. Returning to England, his family found him changed from his wartime experiences. Now, abrasive and aggressive, quick to snap at people, and pretty willing to resort to physical violence, and a whole host of other symptoms we would now associate with PTSD, but were poorly understood at the time. Braham remained in aviation as an officer in the RAF, and then a test pilot in the Canadian RAF before he finally passed in 1974 from a brain tumor at the age of 53. And finally, to end the day, let's have a good old-fashioned apex predator in a Spitfire. James Edgar Johnny Johnson was born in 1915 in Barrow-upon-Soar, Leicestershire. The son of a police officer, he was not really teen prodigy material or a pre-war flying enthusiast. In fact, an early rugby injury left him with a damaged collarbone that initially complicated his entry into pilot training. Johnson was finally accepted into the RAF in August 1939. After retraining to overcome concerns about his injury, he earned his wings in spring 1940, just as the air war over England intensified. He was posted to number 19 Squadron briefly, before moving to number 616 Squadron in December, and saw limited action in that first year or so, right? Unfortunately, his recurring injury had reared its head once again, and he spent a lot of that time grounded. Well, after some corrective surgery, which seemed to resolve the issue, he got into the skies more regularly and recorded his first kill, a Bf-109 over Gravelines in northern France in May 1941. Johnny's own rise in 1941 and 1942 was kind of reflective of the RAF's gradual transition from defense to offense. He developed a reputation for tactical discipline and controlled aggression, flying intelligently, almost scientifically. We've seen that mentality is pretty common among some of the higher scoring aces like Germany's Erich Hartmann. Serving under and alongside such people as Douglas Bader, Johnson refined his understanding of fighter tactics and even went as far as disobeying his squadron leader's tactical directions in favor of what he considered to be superior modern ideas. Nobody could really argue with his success, though, and as his tally ramped up, he gained command of his own unit in July 1942, number 610 Squadron. He participated in operations such as the Dieppe Raid before transferring to command what would soon become Canadian number 127 Wing in early 1943. Johnny stamped his tactics that he'd mastered earlier in his career onto that new command, and his wing became one of the most respected fighter units in the theater. He kept gradually notching up the victories too, mainly in fighter sweeps and bomber escort missions, passing the 20 mark by mid-1943. Through 1944 and 45, he participated in the Normandy landings and the push into Germany, scoring his final confirmed victory, number 34, on September 27, 1944 over Nijmegen as part of Operation Market Garden. That places him at the top of the British fighter ace charts for World War II. All of those victories in one variant or another of the Spitfire. After the war, Johnny remained in aviation and even briefly popped up in the Korean War, flying F-80 Shooting Stars and F-86 Sabres, as kind of a guest performer for the US Air Force, not too much is known about his time there, but it brought with it another batch of medals and honors from the United States to go alongside the growing number awarded by his homeland. He retired from the RAF in 1965 with the final rank of Air Vice Marshal and remained active in civilian life up until his death, January 30th, 2001. But you know, there's a heck of a lot more that went on even in these guys' careers that we didn't have time to go into today. Never mind the dozens of other aces that we haven't spoken about. So get your heads into some books, or onto the internet, I guess, and continue your reading there. It's genuinely no exaggeration to say that these people have some of the most fascinating stories of anybody in the war. And they are absolutely worth further reading. And since you are enjoying our Fighter Ace galleries though, remember to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss a thing, and join the Time Ghost Army at patreon.com/timeghosthistory or at timeghost.tv so we can keep our own aces flying. And vote on which nation's World War II aces you want to see covered next in the comments below, and discuss why Belgium is the correct answer. See you next time.